I'm delighted to extend a special welcome to and introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Niall Breslin, who of course needs no introduction to any Irish audience, being an effective, focused and active mental health campaigner. We are delighted that Niall has agreed to take time out from his demanding schedule to deliver the opening address at this year's conference. Niall, also known as Brezzy, is a mental health activist, songwriter, music producer and public speaker who comes from the Midland town of Mullingar in County Westmeath. It is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Niall Breslin. I'm sure that you will join with me in giving a warm welcome to him. Many thanks.
President, Dean, Executive Director, members of the Board of the Faculty of Nursing and Midwifery, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. It's often difficult to know what to say in these situations, to get a point across in quite a short space of time, or even to tell your story, which I'm 36 years of age, which is probably we need more than 15 minutes. And I also think the irony of sending a lad up with an anxiety disorder to speak in front of people is quite cruel, but I'll give it a shot anyway. But I think it's quite important. I always think when you're communicating around mental health, I don't think it's as complex as we often think it is. Our ability to communicate is often where the issue is. Because I often find people who have a huge empathy and understanding of mental health don't quite get their point across sometimes. So for me, hopefully the way I'm going to do that is by telling you a story. And I often think stories are the most impactful way of actually connecting and relating to something, especially something that's as sensitive and as slightly misunderstood as mental health. This story might sound odd, but I've never sold myself as a sane person, so that's quite okay. And this story started when I decided that I'd had enough of ignoring my mental health, and I had enough of it, I suppose, destroying and manipulating my relationships and my careers. And I decided to take some control back on whatever way I had to do it. But it was a long process and many interesting stories which you're about to hear. But there's a very important point at the end of this story that I really hope you all listen to. I had two phobias. Everyone in this room has a phobia, even the lads who go, I'm not scared of nothing. We all have a phobia. Everybody has one. And at this point, I'd been addressing my mental health for maybe a year or two. I've been going with quite proactive counselling. I've been really educating myself on why I was feeling the way I was feeling and why it was so impactful on my life. But I had these two phobias, and one of them was water, and not drinking it, obviously, or I'd be dead, but swimming in it, open water, rivers, lakes, seas. Forget about it. I wouldn't put my foot in it. I had this deep, profound phobia of water. But worse than that, on top of that phobia, was fish. I didn't like fish. I don't like the taste of fish. I don't like the smell of fish. I don't like how they look. And Irish fish are particularly unattractive. They're not like these coral reef Finding Nemo things you see on TV. They're odd. They've got whiskers and they'll swim right beside you. You get the idea. I don't like swimming and I don't like fish. So I decided to sign up for an open water sea swim race, even though I couldn't swim. And the mere idea of even getting into water brought my anxiety disorder to its full frontal attack. And I signed up for this open water sea swim, which was in 8 weeks. And I got into the swimming pool on the Monday. I had never swam before. And my coach said, put your head in the water. And I wouldn't put my head in the water. I couldn't put my head in the water. I don't know why. And I made the realization, with my anxiety disorder, one of the biggest manifestations of it was my inability to breathe. I used to panic an awful lot. Breathing wasn't subconscious to me much of the time. I used to have to fight for breath, which is a terrifying thing for anyone to live with. And apparently, and not even apparently, factually, you can't breathe in water. So I wouldn't put my head into it, because the minute I put my head into it, I panic. But I got in every day for 8 weeks. I got into the water, because one thing I do believe around people who've struggled with their mind, no matter what you hear in the media or what we tend to throw around, I believe they're simply tougher than everybody else, because they have to be. You have to be more resilient. You have to fight every day to do the things people take for granted and find simple, like walking into a lecture, like walking into a classroom, things that you might think are easy, can be very difficult for some people. So in this case, I got into the water every day for 8 weeks. That resilience kicked in until I found myself on High Rock Pier in Malahide, about to do my first open water sweet swim. Now, I'm not saying I was a great swimmer, but leading up to that, I had learnt all these new techniques, visualization techniques, these relaxation techniques, these cues that I used to think were a little bit, hippie-ish. Didn't believe they were true. I didn't believe there was science behind it until I started doing it. And then I found myself on the pier, and it was very choppy. And the reason I knew it was really choppy is because the really strong swimmers were going, "It's fairly choppy, lads." And I'm not saying this because it's a good narrative, but I was by far the calmest person on that pier. I'd learned all these powerful I call them mental fitness techniques, things I wish I was taught in school, but I wasn't. I had put them into practice, and I looked at my heart rate. My heart rate was 45. I was like, I am actually, ironically, the calmest person here. Until some guy walks up to me, a real dub, and he goes, "Brezzy, I need to tell you something." He said, "The seals are mating in Dublin Bay at the moment, and they're getting confused with the swimmers in their wetsuits." And he said, "Slap their tail, it turns them off." I said, "Turns them off what?" And he winked at me. And I looked at my watch, and my heart rate had increased slightly to about 160. And any of these mental fitness techniques that I've been so proactively teaching myself kind of went out the window. And I don't believe there's a psychologist in this world that could get you over this particular hump. But I still got into the water. And I swam, and I got around. I never forget turning at the buoy. It was about a kilometre out to the Irish Sea. And I turned around, and I looked at the coastline, and I laughed to myself, and I go, "I can't swim. This is crazy." And I was looking for seals everywhere, and I was like, "This is mad." And I swam back in, and I got out of the water, and I went up to the same guy, and I said, "I didn't see any seals." And he goes, "There are no seals." And I said, "This guy's a genius. He took my 2 biggest phobias, and he replaced them with a bigger one." Now, this story might seem like it's about phobia and facing your fears, but actually it's got nothing to do with that. The reason this story is immensely important to me is when I got back into the car and I was driving back to Dublin. I think one of the most difficult parts of living with a mental health issue for many people, and I believe if you actually actively asked everyone this, they'll probably tell you the same thing. And it really doesn't matter what particular issue you are living with. When you're going through it, it's very, very, very difficult to have any empathy for yourself. Any. Which is immensely difficult. And I think sometimes you have to try and get into the headspace of thinking like that. You can never be proud of yourself. You can never believe you are anything. That's not good for you. But I remember getting into that car, and no matter what I had achieved up to that point in my life, my 30 years on earth, I'd never actually felt this feeling. And it came up through my feet and into my legs, into my stomach and into my chest, and I swear to God, my head nearly exploded. And I didn't know what it was, but it felt good. And I made the realization that it was pride. But it wasn't pride that I just felt I should feel. It was proper internalized pride. But more importantly that, it was an explosion of self-compassion. I felt truly, I had so much compassion for what I just did, what I put myself through, what I faced. Not just because of the 8-week learning how to swim, more the 15 years before that, of deciding that I was going to tackle my mental health issues. But at that moment, I made a huge realization, and I hope you all understand this one, is that without self-compassion, life really isn't worthwhile. You need it. You need to practice it, and you need to practice it especially when you feel like not practicing it, because that's when it becomes more powerful. And I really think it's one of the most missed things in modern society. I think we're so hard on ourselves. Irish people especially, we can't even take compliments from other people. Never mind pay ourselves a compliment. You go up to my sister and I go, "I like your top." She won't go, "Thanks." She'll go, €15 in pennies. Like, just take the compliments. Have compassion for yourselves. And I think that major lesson was the building block to my recovery. And I implemented that into everything I did all the time, every single day. I would look in the mirror and I would congratulate myself. It didn't mean I'd have to go around high-fiving myself every 5 seconds. But it's the capacity to really go deep and appreciate yourself. And the reason I'm saying that to you guys, I'm aware of I'm aware of who I'm speaking to and what you all do. And I hope that some of the major lessons that I've learned that I'm probably just going to hopefully say to you now to finish my talk might reverberate a little bit with you. The two major lessons I've learned through facing my own mental health was, the biggest one was never, ever, ever be afraid to be vulnerable. That's critical. We live in a society that fears failure, that has a constant need to achieve, that drives perfectionism, that drives stuff that really does not matter when you're 90 years of age and you're lying on a bed. So I really think the ability to be vulnerable is a powerful strength to have, and it's a lesson that I'm trying to teach as many young people as I can, to understand that it's an admission of strength, your capacity to deal with adversity. And this isn't an Oprah Winfrey quote, it's a fact. It's just the way it is. And so that's my first major point. My second point of things that I've learnt, which is really important for everybody, but especially for those who stress and worry a lot, like me. Stop worrying about things you have no control over, especially in the modern world. And that's really, really important, because at the moment, there's an immense amount of apathy and rhetoric of hate and negativity basically exploding across the world for many different reasons. And I used to get so caught up by that. But then I realized I don't control it. But what I do control is the amount of empathy I can show to other individuals. I can't control that man who wants to go around spouting hate and racism just because somebody does it on TV. I can't control that. But I can neutralize it by being nice to one other person. And that's the way I approach it. So doing what you do, I think it's important that you all have to recognize that, for me, you're the gatekeepers of empathy. But because you're surrounded by people who do what you do, you probably don't give yourselves enough compassion. And as nurses and as medical professionals, it's important that you do that, because you spend so much of your time trying to be compassionate for others. And you sometimes forget that you have to look after yourself, and self-care, and how critical that is. So that's a really important point that I'd want to put across. But to finish, no matter what you hear in the news and across the world, and I think this is important for every generation, not just young people, no matter what we hear and what we're constantly bombarded with on, I won't even name the news outlets and the online internet, and I have a true belief that the vast majority of people on planet Earth are sound and lovely. You'll just never hear about them. It's not how the media is operating anymore. It doesn't want you to feel safe. The reality is the person next to you is probably lovely and probably sound. And we have to start recognizing and celebrating that. If we do that, and we adapt these kind of philosophies into our life, what ultimately a mental health activist is trying to do is trying to change culture and attitudes towards mental health, to reduce the stigma so people can deal with what is a very dealable with issue on many occasions. And that is the ultimate goal of an activist. And I think by adopting those simple lessons into your life, having more compassion for yourself as an individual, not trying to control things you don't control, and just showing empathy to anybody and everybody that you can, and to understand that the world isn't as horrible and fearful and scary as we all think. And I think if you can adopt that, you would change yourself as an individual. If you change yourself as an individual, you'll change the person beside you. That person will then influence the community, which will then influence society, and then will influence the attitudes. And changing an attitude in a country, in a society, is an immensely difficult thing to do. And it takes leadership, but it doesn't take leadership as systematic leadership. It takes individual leadership. It takes people. Everybody in this room can contribute to it. So opening this, it's amazingly humbling to be given this honorary fellowship. Nobody does what we do to get fellowships or get these things. We do it because we believe our society needs to change. We also do it because it's immensely personally therapeutic. But at the end of the day, I think as individuals, if you take anything from what I've said, have more compassion for yourselves and what you do, because it's immensely important. And it's going to be a huge part of what we're going to do if we are going to change attitudes in this country towards mental health. Thanks a million.